Pretty sure.
I am sure too. Excellent. Thank you. You see, that's why I know I need reminders. Here we go. Where is my, here we go. This is the time for returning to the one from where I've come from. Now you echo me. Who am I? Who am I? Where am I? Where am I? When will I be the one who I was meant to be again? Who am I? Who am I? Where am I? Where am I? When will I be the one who I was meant to be? This is the time for returning to the one from where you've come from. Again, echo me. Who are you? Who are you? Where are you? Where are you? When will you be the one who you were meant to be? Who are you? Who are you? Where are you? Where are you? When will you be the one who you were meant to be? Now you might imagine that we're standing in concentric circles. The circle in the middle is facing out, and the first circle on the outside is facing in. So that those of you who are facing out from the middle are looking at and singing to a person on the outside of the circle. This is the time for returning to the one from where we've come from. Ask the question, who are we? Who are we? Where are we? Where are we? When will we be the ones who we were meant to be? Who are we? Who are we? Where are we? Where are we? When will we be the ones who we were meant to be? And we're going to repeat that last part again. And when we do, identify someone here in this holy space to sing to. All right, have you identified someone? Here we go. This is the time for returning to the one from where we've come from. Who are we? Who are we? Where are we? Where are we? When will we be the ones who we were meant to be? Who are we? Who are we? Who, where are we? When will we be the ones who we were meant to be? Perhaps that's the quintessential question of this month of Elul. Who am I? Who are you? And who are we? As we come a little bit closer to recognizing our essential truth. I am so delighted and honored to be joined again by my teacher and my colleague. Boy, I didn't know I was ever going to be able to say that. Rabbi Daniel Siegel. Welcome, Reb Daniel.
Thank you.
So I'm going to spotlight you, Reb Daniel. If you want to see everyone, I'm going to leave it to you all to either change to gallery view or to spotlight view. But for now, I'm going to spotlight Reb Daniel, and please know that I'm going to be sharing the text on the screen for you to follow along as we lilmod lamed this morning.
Cool. Yeah, but the last person that I want spotlighted is me on my own screen. There we go. Okay. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, almost all of your visuals disappeared on my screen. I don't, it doesn't look like you've turned off your video cameras, but I think they're just coming on very slowly. So I guess it's worthwhile to say that I live in a place which has not yet um, gone fiber optic. And so we're on a very old um, Wi-Fi system that has been really erratic this summer when there are so many people here. So you should know that just in case. I mean, you're gradually reappearing on my screen, which is nice. And but if anything happens, I'll do my best to get back on as quickly as I can. So before we start sharing the screen, I want to just say that for those of you who were here for the last time that I was here, I was kind of blown out by not having thought about what a gathering on Zoom actually could mean. I just assumed that it was going to be, Reb Mark and some of the people who live within 10 miles of where he lives. And I just forgot. I mean, as someone who's been using Zoom since the first start, I don't know why that was, but I remember when I used to teach in the Aleph ordination program, and somebody would raise a question, and I would say, "Well, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up." And before I could say that, 4 people had found the answer online already, and so I had to learn how to, how to remember that that this is how we work these days. I think the only person that I really recognize is iPhone, because I have one of those too. So I don't know who that is, but whoever you are, it's nice to see you too. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. And if we were in person, I would take some time and go around the room and get a sense of who you all are. But I think maybe this time I'll just accept that you're all my friends already. So I do want to say that I feel very honored by being asked back a second time. That's a special honor that you don't get on the first try. So I'm hoping that I can at least partially live up to the expectations of those of you who were here last time and those of you who are coming because you heard things about last time. I also realize that I'm out of practice. For the past several years, I really haven't done very much sharing in groups. Most of my learning time has been one-on-one with people who have come to me for various things. So that's another thing that I'm trying to learn again how to do. And one more thing before we really start. I just want to say to you that my thoughts on Teshuvah are really in somewhat of a jumble inside my head. The text that I'm sharing with you is a text that I found and translated years ago. I've read it many times. I read it again, twice, I think, for this session. I also read a lot of other things about Teshuvah, especially, the Rambam, who has 10 full chapters on how to do it. And I took on as a personal study course for this year, which is now almost over, a book called the Ma'or Vashemesh, The Light and the Sun, which was written by the Piasetzner. Those of you who know, Piasetzner was often called the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto. And his most famous book was actually the book that he wrote, the collection of his talks from within the ghetto, called the Eish Kodesh, the Holy Fire. And for those of you who don't know him and would like to, Nehemiah Poland did an amazing book on him and quotes the Eish Kodesh extensively. And I once actually, for a weekend I went and read all the sections he did not quote to see if he had cherry picked. And absolutely he had not. Every quote that he chose not to put still was in the same framework as the ones that he took. So it's a really fabulous book to read, and an important one because there are so few rabbinic sources that actually come from directly inside the Holocaust, and even fewer from afterwards. So it's a really good book. But he also wrote other books. He was an educator. I think he ran a kind of yeshiva high school in Piaseczna, which is a suburb of Warsaw. And so he wrote a series of books, mostly to his students, about what kind of people they should be and how to become that. And in the final short section of a three book section, what are you holding up? Yeah, that's Conscious Community. That was written. He wrote that before the war, when he was still an educator. That was translated by. I know people, but names have trouble coming out.
Andrea Cohn-Kiner.
Right. Yeah, Andrea Cohn-Kiner. Thank you. So that was written before the war, and this other book that I'm citing at the moment was also written before the war. It's called Tsav Zeruz, which sort of literally means commanding and warning. And it's a series of, again, it's too bad that I don't think it's translated. I really was tempted to want to do it, but it'd be a big project. But a lot of it is his musings on his own life. He had a difficult life. He lost a son early on. His wife died just as the war was starting. And these are his sort of musings and reflections on what it's like trying to be a traditional chassid in interwar Poland. But when he's talking about what does it mean to be a righteous person, he tends to cite a book called the Ma'or Vashemesh, the light and the sun, and or a light and the sun. And it turns out that was his great grandfather. And I liked his citations, so I decided to read that book as a study text for myself for this whole year, because it's organized by the Torah reading. So I have, getting close to being done now. And the thing is and the reason why I say this at some length is because I would wager that in every single week, in other words, for every single unit of his book, he must mention Teshuvah at least 3 times, at least, often way more than that. And so it really really had me thinking a lot about Teshuvah and about all the things that we have in our tradition about it. And it has made it very difficult for me to come up with a totally organized kind of presentation that would say, aha, now this is a self-contained thing. It works, you got it. Which I think, as I want to say also, I just posted a blog, just waiting to get started here. And excuse me. And the thing is that, I think that's more authentically Jewish than trying to have an airtight presentation, because Hebrew doesn't work that way, and we Jews don't really work that way. We're not an either or people. We're a both and people, or we're continuum people, and our language reflects that. I always like to say that halacha doesn't mean law. It means a going. It's a participle of a verb, right? Lalecha, to go. And halacha is the way we go, right? It's not, this is how you do it. This is how we figure out how to do it, right? Is what it's really all about. And so I think that having this sort of open-ended in a certain way will work. Hopefully it'll work. And the other thing that comes out of that is that I hope to use the text and your input as the guides for how this discussion will go. So what I want to suggest to you is that since we're on Zoom, if you have something you want to say, then you can use that little yellow waving hand. Everybody know about that one? I think it's on the bottom of your screen. There's a thing called reactions. Yeah, right. And one of them is like a yellow hand. If you click that, it will move you to the front of my screen so that I'll see that you want to say something. But I hope you'll give me permission to choose the moment that would be best. If you want to, I would like to not have the same people talk too much. So other than me, I guess. But if that's the case and you have something else you want to say, just jot something down in the chat. Either I want to say something, or this is what I want to ask about. And Reb Mark will keep an eye on the chat and let me know what's there. But this way, there are people who take longer to formulate their questions and their thoughts. I happen to be one of them. So I rarely speak at the beginning of a meeting. I usually don't speak until lots of other people have had a chance, just because it takes me that long. So I want to give that option to the people who will need it. Okay, so let's put, for the moment now, let's put the opening, the top of the page, the opening nigun on the screen. Okay, this comes from Psalm 27, which is the Psalm for Elul. And this is a melody that Reb Zalman applied to these words. And so this is where I wanted to start. I often start a little bit off key, but I'll get it as we go along. L'cha amar libi, there it is off key. Bakshu fanai et panecha Hashem avakesh L'cha amar libi Bakshu fanai et panecha Hashem avakesh. Al taster panecha mimeni al tat bi'af avdecha. Al taster panecha mimeni al tat bi'af avdecha. Ezrati hayita, Ezrati hayita, al titsheni v'al tazveni, Elohei ishi. L'cha amar libi, Bakshu fanai et panecha Hashem avakesh. L'cha amar libi, Bakshu fanai et panecha Hashem avakesh. Al taster panecha mimeni al tat bi'af avdecha. Al taster panecha mimeni al tat bi'af avdecha. Ezrati hayita, Ezrati hayita, al titsheni v'al tazveni, Elohei ishi. I'm sorry that I didn't do this with a transliteration. I apologize to those people who don't read Hebrew. This is one of the nigunim, by the way, of Reb Zalman's that he considered to be one of the four most important nigunim to him. So it's worthwhile to remember it if you can. I guess we were recording it, so you'll have it if you want it. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to ask you a question to get started, which is, what do you think Teshuvah is about in our tradition? Right, and these are like just bullets, right? So maybe 5 or so of you will come up with a little something, not a treatise. Leave room for other people to have their versions of the ideas. But what do you think it's about? If I say this is the time to do tshuva, what does that mean? As far as you know, or as far as you think you know, and every answer is a good one. I think you could just unmute for this one and speak.
Returning.
Okay.
Turning back toward the unity.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Turning back toward the unity.
Turning back toward divinity.
Unity.
Yep.
One.
Unity. Same thing. Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Mary
For
Rita?
me,
You have to unmute yourself, Mary Rita.
In the turning back, to take the time to really examine my life and to begin to deepen those intentions that I will have going into the new year.
Okay. Examination of a life, right? Yep. How do we do tshuva? What do you know from our tradition? How do we do it?
for
Ellen?
me,
Yep.
yeah, for me, it's about really leaning back into the deliciousness of the being beloveds with God this month and
Ooh.
looking at what do I want to strengthen or support? What do I want to let go of or do differently? But it's from this just divine support.
Okay. Great. I saw one, there was one in the chat, it looked like, that said, go inward, if I saw it right. I'm also realizing that my eyes are not what they should be anymore.
Yeah, reflecting, looking within, going within.
Okay.
That's
Any
in
others?
the chat. Those are things in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah. Any more? Interesting that so far no one has said what?
I was going to say starting anew, like cleansing and
Yeah.
getting rid of what hasn't served me, and having an intention to start fresh and new.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Good.
while embracing
Devorah,
love.
yeah, somebody has
Yeah.
not really answered Reb Daniel's question directly. How do we do it, Devorah?
Isn't that? I know. I'm aware of that too. Go ahead, Devorah. What do you
We're
want
getting
to say?
there. We're getting there.
Go ahead,
Another
Devorah.
aspect of it is mending relationships.
Okay. Mending relationships,
The
Jeff.
only way to do it is to do it. All these things, it's just to do it.
Yeah. Well,
Jeff Faust, welcome.
You have to
Starting
something.
with feeling God's love, to start with looking with where we're blocked and broken in ourselves, our relationships to each other and with God, and then to work on to realign and return. And once we work through the blocks, then we can be open to the oneness.
Okay. I see Dan.
Yeah, for me, it sounds like getting out of the present, getting out of looking forward, but turning around to look back at the past year, whatever time period. Look back in it and do a cheshbon nefesh, an analysis of what the past year. So it's getting out of the present and the future for a moment.
Okay.
All right, so I'm
Let's
just
take
going to recognize that Ellen and Mary Rita have already offered something, and I am chomping at the bit to say the word forgiveness, to ask for forgiveness from another person, bein adam v'chaviro, to ask for forgiveness of oneself, and to ask for forgiveness from divinity.
Okay. So that we finally got to one of the major characteristics that the tradition talks about. It's interesting that none of you talked about fasting. None of you talked about Yom Kippur. None of you talked about praying. This is a really, you'll see that it's an interesting new place that that we've come to at this time. And I'm going to be focused a little more on the old place. So thank you. This was all very, very good. So let me say that if you look at the classical sources, they are assuming that tshuva is a returning from a specific wrongdoing, right? I did this wrong, and I am sorry I did it. And what do I have to do in order to get that forgiveness, right? And if you look then, at the extensive, I mean, the Rambam is just extensive about it. I mean, it's 10 chapters in his book is about, these are the characteristics of tshuva. This is what you can do tshuva for. This is what you can't do tshuva for. And it's a fairly elaborate thing. And we'll see when we look at the text that he's going to be mentioning something that will seem initially, pretty obscure for us, which is that he'll say things like, well, what if you can't do all the fasting that's required? Well, where does that come from, right? There is a whole tshuva process that was developed by the people who are called Hasidei Ashkenaz, the Hasidim of Germany, right? The German Hasidim of the I think mostly the 12th and 13th century. And these guys had a really interesting approach, because the question that they were, let's see if I don't know if I can lead you on with this question so you can see what the answer is before I say it. But what was bothering them? What was worrying them about the whole notion of tshuva and sin? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a little hard for us to experience that easily any longer. But I'll give it one try. See if any of you can figure it out. What would have been their primary worry around the notion of sin and repentance, or sin and return?
Hell?
Pardon?
Were they frightened of hell?
Were they frightened of
hell and damnation?
Hell and damnation. Not so much. A little bit, but not so much.
Death.
Death? No, they actually weren't scared of death at all. I think we've become much more scared of death than most generations before us have been.
Not
it's
being written in the book of life?
I'm sorry, I heard book of life. I didn't hear the first words.
Not being written in the book of life.
Not being written in the book of life. That's interesting. Maybe. I don't know that for sure. I don't know the answer. I don't know whether that's there or not.
Acceptance.
Okay.
Acceptance.
Yeah. All right. I'll tell you what I think it is. They were deeply troubled by the fact that the exile was still happening, that we had not been led back to the land and built the third temple by now, right? I mean, they're talking about 1,000 years after the destruction of the second temple, and they're wondering why the exile is going on for so long. What is it that we're doing wrong that's preventing the exile from being relieved, right? And they are very attached to the notion that if you do something wrong, you will be punished, or the other way around. If you feel that you're being punished, you must have done something wrong. I think we have a version of that in our time, don't we? Where, especially, I think that it's been said more about women than men. I think that there is this sense that we blame ourselves. In fact, I do that, right? Maybe we all do it, but I do that. If something goes wrong, and in my life, I think I must have done something. What did I do? Right? How do I take personal responsibility for what happened? That's a whole sort of self-help approach, that we have today. So we're not totally estranged from that, but their formulation of it was, why is this bitter exile? I mean, they lived in Germany. That's a Catholic country at that time. And Jews don't have it easy in Europe for the most part. So that's their question. And so their question is, what did we do wrong? What are we still doing wrong that makes us have to live in this exile? So they start a whole atonement process. They atone for the sins of their parents and their ancestors. Then they atone for sins that they might have done. Then they start atoning for the sins that their kids are going to do, right? And their kids are going to do, trying to find this formula that will be authentic repentance, allowing for the exile to end. And what is it that they then come up with are a whole series of behaviors. And these behaviors have very little to do with Yom Kippur. The most stark one that I remember reading was that for some, it depended on what you did, what you thought you did. But if you did this certain something, then well, that's what it is. I see that in the chat, fear of losing help from Hashem. is exactly right, except that it was the fear that they had already lost help from Hashem. And why was that so? So one thing that's said, for example, is if you do this thing, what you should do is strip yourself naked, smear yourself with honey, go out into a field where you know there's beehives, and stand there and let them sting you. And if they sting you to death, so much the better. Right? Other sins were voluntary exile. You would leave where you lived, and you had to leave and go, if you practice this, and just wander for 2 years or whatever it was to do that. So there were a whole set of practices around how you do repentance, right? How you do tshuva. And it's to that Hasidus, right? Hasidism is responding to that in a new way. Right. And in a way which I think is really interesting, and in a way which personally I happen to endorse for the most part. So how do we do that? Right. The one thing is that in Hasidism, tshuva is clearly a way of life. It is not something that happens once a year. It's not limited to Yom Kippur at all. It's every single day, every part of every single day. Now you might think, oh my God, that makes life really horrible, right? If that's going to happen. But it actually has the opposite effect, right? Because tshuva is not about me chronicling all the things that I think I did wrong, which you should do. I mean, none of them say you shouldn't do that. But it's not primarily about that. It's primarily about having an attitude, a way of living that constantly has you turning back, right? So, for example, before we got started, Reb Mark asked me, how are things in my garden? I love my garden. I love gardening. I'm not that good at it, mind you, but I love it. But there are moments when I look out and I think, oh my God, I have so much to do. Got to do this thing, and I have to do that. I have to do this. I'm never going to get those things done today. And all of a sudden, I'm in a state of anxiety about it. What has happened to me? I've forgotten that the reason why I garden is because I love God. Right. And I love the notion that I can participate in nature. I don't like to say that I go into nature. I say that I join nature. I acknowledge my part of being in nature, right? I'm a part of nature. And I forget that when it becomes me and the work I have to do in the garden. And when that happens, I do tshuva right away, right? As quickly as I can notice it, I immediately say, wait a minute, that's not how I do it. That's not who I want to be. Right. So that's the tshuva for that particular moment, right? That happens. So now I want to use the text as a starting point, but I really do want you to feel free to put that yellow hand up and have comments on it. And if we don't do the whole thing, we don't do the whole thing. Whatever we do will be what we need to do. Okay. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is from Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov. He wrote a more famous book called the Bnei Yissaschar, but this is from a different book. I discovered this teaching because they put out a Sidur in his name, and they put in some introductory essays of his, and this is where I found it. And I found this to be a really fascinating analysis, discussion of what tshuva is, and also that they put it at the beginning of the Sidur. In other words, even if you don't read it every day before you start davening, you thumb through it, you know it's there, right? And it's something that is a preliminary for doing it. So the first thing that he wants to ask, right, the first thing he raises, and you have my highlights here from when I read this the first time, which will also make it easier to cover more of the text so we don't have to do everything. But if you look, he starts off by saying that before I wrote this, before I started writing this, there's already a lot of written material that says that all the Torah, in other words, all the Torah study and all the performance of mitzvot that a person does. Oh, and by the way, one more thing. If I use a term that any one of you doesn't get, please put that hand up quickly, and we will go back and translate that term. And you can rest assured that there's at least 2 other people in the room who are saying, oh, thank God that person asked that question. I was too embarrassed. I want to do it. So go ahead and do that. Wait a minute. Okay, no, Kana picked it up. Okay, great. So he starts off by saying, look, long before I wrote, it says that anyone who who studies and davens when while they're still called a rasha, right? While they're still called a bad person, is wasting their time, right? That study and learning, that learning and performance is not the equivalent of a sacrifice. It doesn't work, right? And there are a couple of citations that I checked on that that sort of show that from earlier mystical Kabbalistic writings that kind of make that point. I don't think I have to cite them specifically, because he says this is like, here's a gardening image again, right? So this is like trying to plant before preparing the soil. So it's like coming to a garden plot that's full of thistles and weeds and whatever, and just throwing the seed into the middle of that and expecting something to happen, right? It's not going to happen. You have to prepare the ground first, which means the effect in when we translate that into what we're talking about now, it means that we have to prepare our ground, right? We have to be worthy enough to do this Torah study and these mitzvot before we can do them. So that's something that's contained in the tradition, and he starts from that place, right? Yeah, what makes a person? I got to say that the side discussions, either I have to ignore them altogether, or maybe it's, I don't know. Yeah, you should feel free to do it. They just keep popping up on my screen, and I'm intrigued by what you're writing. So, what makes a person wicked? Well, what makes a person wicked is they don't learn Torah and they don't do mitzvahs, right? That's what makes the simple answer of what makes a person wicked. Because of course, things like not cheating in business are also mitzvot, right? It's not like mitzvahs are only about ritual. Ritual sustains the ethical and moral, is the support for the ethical and moral mitzvot, which are the key parts of the tradition. Okay, so that's what he says, right? Now, but then he says, look, and I can't move the screen. So if you want to, move it up a little bit. Wait, let me just see where you went. Okay, I think that'll do. That'll be all right. So he says, think about it though. Oh yes, right, because it's the second paragraph. So think about it. If you say that I can't study Torah and I can't do mitzvot unless I have perfected myself, what's the obvious, response that we're going to make to that? Whoever does that, how can you ever do it? You'll never do it. So why should I bother studying, right? Why should I bother with that? And so then he says, but think about it. He says, are you kidding? He says, think about it. Do you really think that the tradition that we don't want you to pray every day? Do you really think that we don't want you to study every day? Do you think that we don't want you to give tzedakah? What is the matter? That can't be the right answer, right? That can't be the right answer. So this is the thing that he wants to go for. He's looking at a whole bunch of stuff that's in the tradition, that usually what happens is that we cherry pick which things we want to pull out, and we ignore the ones that are contradictory to the ones that we're leaving out. And what he wants to do is look at them all square, just say, this is what it is, this is what the problem is, now let me find a way to resolve it. Okay, so if we move on to the next unit there, please. Okay. Okay, so he makes the point. I don't think we have to spend too much time on this page. He makes the point over and over again that even if you were to say that, that famous line in Pirkei Avot, right, in Ethics of the Fathers, where it says, don't say, I will study when I have time, because perhaps you won't have time, right? And so he's saying, even if you know that you'll have time, even if you know that in an hour you're going to have the possibility of doing a wonderful mitzvah, that doesn't free you from doing the mitzvahs in that hour that you're waiting for that moment to come. You're never free from it. So how can you argue? How can you make a case for the fact that if you don't prepare the ground first, that you can't get started? Right? That's what he wants to say. So he's already, if you see what he's doing, he's already beginning to say, just a minute, let's look at this carefully, let's look at this gently, and let's look at it from the perspective of the people who need it, and not from the perspective of textual analysis or midrash or halacha or any of those things. Let's look at it from the perspective of what people actually need. Okay. All right. So then he says, right now he says what we talked about before. Don't think, my beloved, and I love this about this text. I don't know who else writes this way. Ach teda yedidi, right? You, my beloved, who are reading this text, right? You are my beloved. You should know. I want you to know. Can hear the gentleness. Unfortunately, it's not there in my voice, but you can hear the gentleness with which he's talking to us. And he's saying, look, most people have made a serious mistake about what the essence of tshuva is. And they think that the essence of tshuva is to fast and to afflict yourself. Right? Like, what do we call Yom Kippur? What's Yom Kippur called, in the Torah? V'initem et nafshotechem. You should afflict your souls, which we interpret to be fasting, but it doesn't have to be fasting. It could be anything else. And what is the most common, immediate post-Yom Kippur forgetting? Right? We say, why do we have to, if we daven Mariv right after Yom Kippur, why do we already say, forgive us for what we've sinned? We just had a whole day of doing that. Why do we say that? Well, what happens to so many of us as Yom Kippur ends? What do we start thinking? You know the answers to this one. So I'm just going to wait till somebody puts it out. What do you start thinking?
Food.
Yes, food. Oh, did I do something really holy and difficult? I fasted on Yom Kippur. I missed 2 meals. That's what it is, right? You had supper a little early the night before. You missed breakfast and lunch, and you have dinner just a little bit later, after Yom Kippur. That's all. You haven't done that much. Right? I mean, unless you're, all right, never mind, with exceptions that we know about, but nevertheless. So people immediately get into that, right? When I was a pulpit rabbi, and we would finish Yom Kippur, I stayed at the bima for a little while so I could fold up my tallis and I could take off my robe and I could do. People start coming up to me with full plates of food to ask me questions, right? So you already need tshuva, right? The moment it's over, but because the essence of it is not the fasting, right? That's what he's saying. The essence is not the fasting. So here you can see, if you understand it, he's referring back to these Hasidei Ashkenaz and all of the things that they developed as their techniques for tshuva. And he is saying, this is not the way, right? This is not the way. So then what is it, right? What is it? And so he says, the essence of tshuva is regret, right? That's the essence of it, that you regret your distancing, right? You regret that you've fallen away. Right, and that you have, troubled God. He says angered God, but let's say that you've troubled God with your behavior. So he says the essence of tshuva is what goes on inside you, right? It's the regret, right? And then look at what he says now. Then in this last little section, which I have highlighted there, he says, v'teda od yedidi, something else you should know, my beloved. What the rabbi said in the Gemara. How do we know about tshuva? How do we know a person is a baal tshuva? Right? That's going to be important. Not that he did tshuva, but that he's a baal tshuva. And the answer is, if the sin comes to you first time, another time, or a second time beyond that, and you save yourself from it, you don't fall into it, right? Then you are a Baal Tshuva, okay? So you need that wrongdoing to cross your path at least twice more without you falling for it. in order to be a Baal Tshuva. But then comes the most difficult statement in this whole business. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be, you'll forgive this, but this is only, this is assuming it's men, but he's saying it has to be the same woman, the same place, right? At the same strength and the same place. Can you imagine, like, all right, how can you do tshuva then? I mean, if you read that, right, what can you do? The thing that the rabbis say is a little easier, but what Rabbi Yehuda says makes it impossible, right? There's no such thing as that happening, right? What did Heraclitus say? You can't step into the same river twice because it changes, right? Constantly changing, right? So it's not going to be the same. Even if the sin comes to myself again, I'm older already. I'm at least older than I was, right? So maybe it's not so hard for me to do that. So he's pointing that out, that these are the difficult statements. Now let's take it a little farther. What happens if I don't have that opportunity to do that sin again? Right? What happens if it doesn't happen, if it's not there? Supposing it's, they're saying it's something sexual, right? Well, supposing I never see that person again. Supposing that person moves very far away from me and I never see them again, right? Supposing, person could even die, right? Then what do I do, right? I can never, even according to the lighter view of the rabbis, of the majority, how can I ever do tshuva, right? I'm screwed, if you don't mind the pun, right? I'm in bed. What am I going to do, right? So if you start reading this stuff, and by the way, I will tell you that I did read this stuff before I read this text, right? And I came away feeling exactly that way, right? I remember coming to Zalman and talking to him about things like that. Right? Like, what do I do? How do I fix something that can't be fixed anymore, right? And there's a lot of that, right? What if you I don't know, you betray a confidence in a way that has consequences that leads to bad things in other people's lives, and it's gone beyond your ability to bring it back. You can't bring it back. Then how do you ever find a way to do tshuva? How does that ever happen, right? So, so what he says is you have to believe that God is gracious and merciful, right? Don't forget, God is gracious and merciful. Now, there are lots of places in Western religion where even though people will say God is gracious and merciful, they don't really believe it. They think God is punishing, exacting, right? Mean, and it's not, it's in our tradition, it's in the Christian tradition, it's in the Muslim tradition. It's there, we do have that tendency. So he's saying, don't go there, right? Come back from there. There you can come back from. Yes, El Rachum B'Chanun. Right, which is, I think, exactly how, doesn't it how he say it? Yeah, he says it the other way around. Ki chanun v'rachum. Okay, so now he starts to work with this, and that's at the very bottom of this screen, this little bit here, because what he says, but the rabbis didn't say, how do you know tshuva? They say, how do you know a Baal tshuva? Right, and so let me see what he says next, Mark, if he could. I need to be reminded. Can you move it up the next page? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So he says, right. So he says that the truth is that tshuva works even if you don't have an opportunity to do that particular wrong thing again. Even if that doesn't happen, your tshuva still works, right? It's only if you want to be called a Baal tshuva, a master of tshuva, right? So you're a master of tshuva if you have the same opportunity comes up again and you don't take it, then you can be a Baal tshuva. But otherwise, you're just a person who did tshuva. And that tshuva is totally acceptable, right? And totally acceptable. And by the way, he wants to say, the Talmud doesn't say that to be a Baal tshuva, you have to fast for 6 days. Or you have to, prick yourself with needles or do something terrible to yourself. No, it doesn't say that, right? All it says is that if you have the opportunity to do it again, don't do it. So let's not go overboard, he's saying, right? Over and over and over again, he's saying that. And he brings a very interesting example. In the Talmud, in the Tractate of Kiddushin, which is about betrothals, they want to ask the question, because if in those days they were much more fluid with the formulas, so they didn't have a exact set formula like we have today. But so they say, well, what happens if the groom uses this formula? What happens if the groom uses that formula? Does it work? Does the marriage get started? And one of the examples is, behold, you are betrothed to me because I am a totally righteous person. Now, does that stick or doesn't it stick, right? So what the Dinov wants to say is, you know what? The Talmud says it does stick. Why does the Talmud say it sticks? Because maybe at that moment, the person has thoughts of Teshuvah, right? The person has the regret, it has the arousal. And so in that moment, that person actually is a tzaddik, right? He is righteous, and therefore that he's not lying to her, and therefore the betrothal takes. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we might want to challenge that, but I think that the point that he's making here is not about whether this is a good way to betroth a woman and whether it's fair to her and all that. All he wants to say is that the Talmud is recognizing that the essence of Teshuvah happens inside, right? That's the essence place. And all the other stuff is, in a sense, secondary for that, right? Now, so then we go on, right? And yeah, so he gives more examples, right? He gives more examples. When, for example, just from our own experience, when you, I don't want to say, when we sign a conversion document, the witnesses to that document are supposed to be kasher, right? They're supposed to be kosher witnesses. So we say, well, what does it mean to be a kosher witness? And, the Orthodox answer is that they observe Shabbos and kashrut. Then the question is, what does it mean to observe Shabbos and kashrut, right? Is there one set way to do that? Or are there numerous ways to do that? And so we make the assumption that the people are kasher, right? As long as they have, I make that assumption, as long as they have some relationship to Shabbat and some relationship to a food discipline that somewhat resembles the way we've always done it, then they're acceptable as witnesses. So all he wants to do is point out that even though in a lot of the areas where there's focus specifically on Teshuvah, and they seem to be very harsh and demanding, if you look at places where Teshuvah is a tangent to the central issue, you will see that Teshuvah is actually something that happens fairly easily. Okay. So nobody's been wanting to get in yet, I see, but I hope that's okay. So then he says, okay, so then the essence of Teshuvah is three things, right? Regret, leaving it behind, and acceptance of the consequences, right? And then he adds one more piece that goes with it, which the Rambam is very big on, which is a verbal confession. And that's where we get to this notion of going to your friends and saying, look, I did this to you, and it's been bothering me since I did it, and I feel terrible about it, and I'm hoping you can forgive me, right? That's where that comes in, because you have to make that confession. And that's, by the way, what I have found as I get older, that makes it difficult for me, because every Yom Kippur I go to shul and we say the same confession. And every Yom Kippur I say the same thing, I did this wrong. I mean, I didn't do all those things that are in the confessional, but even if I say I did this wrong, not going to do it again, and then what do you know, a week later, I'm doing it again, right? And so I start to ask the question, so what is this for? Why do I care, right? What am I gaining from going to Yom Kippur for the 63rd time since my bar mitzvah, right? Like, what am I getting out of that? What am I doing, And in fact, I went last year to a shul which is very straight in a certain way. I don't want to say which one, but it was very straight. And I had a lot of internal work to do. So I was able to use the service as a kind of white noise to do the work, but the service itself didn't move me, because all it was a recitation of the same pages, the same words that I've recited every year for 60 years plus, and why was I doing that? Because I also had my focus of Teshuvah being that 10 days, right? And particularly Yom Kippur. And by the way, one of the other interesting things is that Yom Kippur really itself is not about asking for forgiveness. You're supposed to do all your asking before Yom Kippur starts. And when you come into Yom Kippur, you are clean already and angelic. And that's what your prayers are about. But because we are also a tradition of great caution, if you look in a machzor, you'll see that the afternoon prayer, the mincha service for right before Yom Kippur starts, has the full confessional in it, in the Amidah. It's all there. And the idea is that's when you say it. But you know how we are. Maybe some people didn't do mincha. Maybe they came in too late. Maybe they don't know about it. So they didn't do the confession. So you know what? We'll put it into the evening service also. Well, maybe people weren't paying attention. Maybe it didn't stick with them. So let's add it to the morning service. Yes, let's add it to the Musaf service. Yeah, let's put it into the afternoon service. Oh, Ne'ilah, it's already too late, right? But because that's the point. The point is it should have happened. It's supposed to have really started before, right? Which is one of the reasons why I say that the fasting is actually a joy. It's not really a punishment. It's a joy because for one day a year, we say we're going to be like angels. We're going to wear white. We're going to not bother with food, which means we don't have to bother with dishes and preparation, try to put things out for the kids so you don't have to do much about it. And we're just going to be together and pray. That's what we're going to do for one day. And if I think about it that way, one day is very little time, right? It's not enough, on that level. I want more than that. Okay, so he says these are the crucial things that are involved in doing tshuva. And now we can move on again. You can read the rest of this on your own. Let me just see. Yeah, I think we're looking for, let me see what I have in my notes before you go too far. Oh yeah, okay. Right. So now he wants to say, now he goes to another piece of the classical stuff on tshuva. And yes, you got it right. It's right there, the highlighted part, right? Because Rabbi Matya ben Charesh, right, says that there are 4 divisions of atonement. Okay, what are the 4 divisions? These are things which are fairly, widely known. One of them is if I violate a positive commandment, which means that I have an opportunity to do a positive commandment and I don't do it, right? The moment I discover that and I regret it, then my repentance is complete, my return is complete, and it's forgiven. If I do a negative commandment, right? If I do something I'm not supposed to do, right? Then tshuva helps, right? It protects you from punishment, but your forgiveness is delayed until Yom Kippur. If you violate a mitzvah for the penalty for which is being cut off, or even by capital punishment, then even both the repentance and Yom Kippur put a wall of prevention against suffering, but it's only I'm sorry. Teshuvah and Yom Kippur will help it, right? Will keep it in abeyance, but nevertheless, you still need afflictions, right? You have to get something bad has to happen to you for that. And finally, if you violate the divine name, right? You curse God or whatever, then nothing really helps you except your own death. And now what the Dinov wants to do is to take that and change it, right? Adjust it. And the way he does it, I'll see if I can do this without even looking at the text. The way he does it is this way. Okay, if you don't do a positive commandment, then everybody agrees, right? The moment you repent for that, then you're forgiven. If you do a negative commandment, right, then the repentance holds off the punishment, but you need Yom Kippur to complete it. I think that's right. Is that right? I think so. Yes. So you need Yom Kippur to complete it, okay? But then he says, but what is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is a special moment when all of Israel's souls are one, right? And so whenever you do your tshuva, right, you are uniting yourselves with the souls of all of Israel. And it's like Yom Kippur. Might as well be Yom Kippur right then and there. So your forgiveness happens right away. And then he says, what about this one about Yom Kippur and repentance? Only postpone things, but you still need to have the afflictions. He says, look, when you violated that kind of a mitzvah and you know what you've done and you feel as bad as you feel, what are you saying? God, bring on the worst. Whatever it is, I'll take it, right? I'll absorb it from you. And so that means that's as good as being afflicted, right? If you're willing to receive the afflictions, then it's as good as being afflicted. And so your forgiveness happens right away, right? And then the last one, in which even you need to have, I'm sorry. Then there's the third one, right? Which requires afflictions. And he said, oh no, wait a minute, did I? No, I sort of, I said it, but I didn't say it exactly the way I had wanted to say it, but that's okay. So he's saying things like, doing, learning, being gracious to people, giving tzedakah, all of these are in the place of afflictions, right? Because there's a place in the Talmud where it says, if you reach into your pocket to take a penny out and I guess you find it not there, that's an affliction. Right? In other words, we don't have to have a terribly dramatic view of what afflictions are. Anything that we do, right? If we give away something that's ours, that's the same thing as being afflicted. And therefore your forgiveness happens right away. Right? You can see why, we have such a strong feeling that tzedakah is the answer to almost everything. And then finally, the ones that need death, he's saying, look, what I'm saying is here, I'm saying to God, I know I deserve to die. So what I'm prepared to do is to give my entire soul and life over to you, and I will be public about it. And whatever the responses are to that, I'll accept them, right? So you become a public thing. It made me think about all these guys who were, like one of them was, I think, with the Watergate thing. I forget who it was, but he became a born-again Christian while he was in jail, right?
Charles Colson.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that says, oh, it's be cynical about it. But he's saying that's exactly right. That's what happens. You do a sin that is so bad that you're so you're so deeply in need of repenting, of teshuvah, right, of coming back, that you are prepared to witness to that, right, to the grace that allows you to continue to live, no matter what the consequences. So even if I lose all my money, I don't care, right? Even if I lose my health, I don't care at that point, right? I want to do this. I want to give it all over. So what he ends up saying is, all of these things that make teshuvah so difficult are really not so difficult, right? I'm showing you a way to make teshuvah something that is very ordinary, that you can do on a regular basis, and it will work for you, right? And that's the main point that he's trying to say. But what that implies, right, is that it's not limited to this time, right? It's all year long. It's every day of all year. That's why if you say an Amidah, if you say the traditional Amidah at least once a day, you always say, Hashivenu Adonai Eloheinu Elecha, return us to you, God, right? And make us come back in full tshuva. And the next blessing is Slach lanu Avinu ki chatanu, right? Forgive us, our Father, because we have sinned, for we have sinned. So this is every day, there's a piece of this, right? And what we do is once a year, we focus that energy and we make it the central theme of a particular time so that we have plenty of time to explore it. And we also have plenty of material to bring with us into our daily activities so that we can continue to return, right? Because that's what it is. We fall away, we return. We fall away, we return. Right? The wonderful little story about Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who said, and he always referred to himself in the third person, and he would say at night, he would say, Levi Yitzchak, what you did today was terrible, really terrible. And he would go, Levi Yitzchak knows that, and Levi Yitzchak feels very bad about it. And then he would say, but so what is Levi Yitzchak going to do about it, right? And so Levi Yitzchak says, Levi Yitzchak is never going to do this again. And the voice comes and says, but Levi Yitzchak, that's what you said last night. And Levi Yitzchak says, yes, but tonight Levi Yitzchak really means it, right? Now, it's a cute story, but it's also very real. I don't know how many of you actually do this, but I often will lie in bed, and I will think, you did it again. Why did you do that? You do that all the time. When are you going to learn not to do that? I'm really going to learn not to do that, starting right now, right? And maybe it works for a day or 2 days, and then I'm tired, and somebody triggers me, and there it goes again, right? I can be, I will say this, I can be mean at times. I try not to be. I don't like being mean. I have so much tshuva to do after every time I'm mean. I have to go to every one of those people that I was mean to and talk to them and acknowledge, what I did or what I blurted out that wasn't something I should have blurted out, and this is a story of my life. It's one of the stories of my life, but I keep going back. I keep saying, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to try and learn this, and it'll work for as long as it works. I'll try to be as conscious as I can, as conscious as I can, and to try, and do it. So,
Reb Daniel, I'm wondering
yes,
whether this is a nice place to pause. And,
it is. It
if
is.
anybody
But
has
I
any,
actually was hoping that you would have interrupted me sometimes, but
oh, yeah,
so
well,
now,
everybody was so enraptured, then they were too busy to put anything into
right.
the chat. Also, I was wondering whether, while I was screen sharing, whether it was possible to raise one's hand, because I couldn't figure out how to do it from my end. But in any case, does
Oh,
anybody have any questions or any quick reflections that you'd like to offer as we start to come in for a landing this evening? Rabbi Jeff.
Yeah, let me put my, so I want to thank you, Daniel, and also a wonderful reminder that in 1999, you put out a wonderful translation of Zalman on Yom Kippur Katan and the cycles of Teshuvah.
yeah, yeah.
I
Come
think
zipped
probably
with
started
a
as
sound
well.
file of Reb Daniel teaching that class. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point because that was the thing, what was it called? It was called Yom Kippur Katan and the Cycles of Tshuva. So Yom Kippur Katan is a monthly cycle. There's the other one that I did with Zalman called Guide for Starting Your Next Incarnation, which is the annual, right? The annual tshuva process. There's a weekly one. And I'm hoping, I asked Salman if he would like to have me work on that with him, and he said no. So I'm gonna try, once some other projects are done, I'm gonna try and do one on the weekly cycle of tshuva, and then we'll put them all together and make them available all together. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up. Somebody else had their hand up, I saw.
Yeah, Stephen and Marcia, and then Eliana.
Yeah, I'll go first. We both have something to say. I was struck by the assumption in the teaching that we will recognize and acknowledge that we did something wrong. That if we violate a negative mitzvah, as soon as we realize it, if we reach into our pocket to do tzedakah and there's no penny there. Anyway, the question I have is methods for helping us realize, because I think sometimes we either don't realize or we imagine that we've done something wrong because I'm never good enough anyway. So those are some of my thoughts, because I always do it wrong because I never quite get it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
So I can hear the Dinov saying to you, but beloved, how can you possibly think that of yourself? You are a child of God. You're in the image of God. God wants you to do as best as you can, and God knows it's not going to be perfect. So as long as you acknowledge it, so you're too, in a sense, you get too caught up in a world in which you're at the center, right? I'm so terrible. Right? So that's something yes, and we're going to keep doing that, right? It's not going to go away just because we wanted to. So we have to work at it, right? And that's a real tshuva to do. And believe me, I'm not speaking from a distance here. Yes, Eliana.
No, I was just going to say very quick and simple. When you were telling the story about the liver Yitzchak, what immediately came to my mind was Ratsuva Shuv. That's how we live our life.
Ratzova Shov, going and coming, right? Going and coming. It's a way that Abraham's journeys in Canaan were talking about, I think. And that's right. It's an image that's used a lot in the tradition around trying to work on your behavior.
Right. Yeshayahu Hanavi speaks of the angels running to and fro, running and returning, running and returning.
Right.
Eliana.
You're muted, Eliana. No, you're muted again. There you go.
My question was, if during Elul or Yom Kippur, someone comes to me and says that they're very sorry for having hurt me, and I still bear a grudge. Well, I feel like my obligation is to forgive them, but forgiving them isn't just words. It's an interior behavior, an interior process. So is there any wisdom from the sages about how to go about this process?
Yeah, if you look at that little volume that I wrote about the Teshuvah process on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's a section there where Zalman talked about stages of forgiveness, and there's a stage where it's pro forma, and there are stages following it where it gets more real as time goes on. So some of it can be, yeah, I forgive you. I don't want to hold a grudge. I'll do my best to let go of it. It's okay. We'll work it out. But you can leave it in a sense open a little bit so that you can work it out inside yourself. But yeah, that's there. In fact, Reb Zalman and I had a year-long, very friendly disagreement about what categories mean which. I think I wrote it in the introduction to that one because it was a precious moment where I really felt that his memory of the teaching, which was not accurate, was much better than the original version of the teaching. So that's why I feel free to say that. But yes, you can look there if you want to see. But there are these. He has these stages, slichila and kapara, right? So to forgive, to really, mechila means so to I don't know, it's deeper. Anyway, let's just say it's deeper for now, right? And kapara means that it's really repaired, right? The relationship is really repaired. If any of you are friends or family with people with whom you've had real knockdown fights, then you know what that is, right? And you're in good terms now, right? Then you know what that is.
Right. Thank you.
I think I saw somebody with a real hand up.
Dan. I'm looking around. Just gesticulate wildly if you can't figure out how to use the virtual. Nope, I don't think so.
All right, I'm a little. We allowed a little more time. I mean, we could stop, but if you want to, I think the most important thing that I would want to repeat is that. I know what I wanted to do at the end. You want to sing at the end, don't you, Mark?
I give the floor over to you, but there are a few things I want to do just housekeeping wise. You certainly, if you want to sing again.
I was thinking of one of Hannah's melodies for Psalm 27.
Beautiful.
But whatever. Okay.
Okay.
So let me reiterate the key point, and then I can turn it back to you. Is that right?
Yes.
So the key point that I want to make again, which I think he makes, and it runs all through Hasidic thinking, is that tshuva is a constant in your lives. Tshuva is something that is happening all the time, right? It's not limited to now, right? You don't have to wait until now to go ask forgiveness from somebody. In fact, it's better, in my mind, to do it right away, right? And all of these things can be done right away. So you don't have an accumulation of a whole year of behavior that you have to go back and think about. That's how we've portrayed it. But I want to say that it's only one way to portray it. It's like a last ditch way, right? If you haven't done it, during the week, during the year, then okay, focus it on these days. But really do it all the time because it isn't a bad thing, right? It's a good thing, right? It says anything that I do that I feel regret for, I did it because I lost my connection at that moment, right? And so what I want to do is restore the connection. And you know it and I know it, that when someone comes to you and says, I think I really did something nasty to you, I really feel badly about it. It's like a really good thing to be able to say, let me tell you that your connection is restored. But from my perspective, I'm not keeping the barrier open and I forgive you. And then that person can walk away saying, the connection was restored and maybe the next time I won't do it. Right. So I think to me, that's the most important thing. It is a way of life. It's a way of living, not a way of life. It's a way of living. And I think it's a beautiful way of living, and it gives us all kinds of options to clear ourselves on a regular basis so that we can keep moving on, so we don't get overburdened by it. And in this day this age that we're all living in right now, I think it's really important to be able to do that because it's really easy to get just overwhelmed by the weight of all that's difficult in this world. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Yasher koach, amen v'amen. Anytime you want to come back, Reb Daniel, if you want to be the scholar in residence of Minyan Oneg Shabbat, the floor is always open. We'd love to have you. And speaking of Minyan Oneg Shabbat, or more acronym known as MOSH, if you are not on our mailing list, I don't know how you got this link. Yeah, somebody must have shared it with you, which is totally okay and wonderful. But we would like to see you again. We have even more fun than we had tonight every Shabbos morning, and we meditate every Wednesday at noon. And Wednesday night, there's always a teaching. As a matter of fact, next week we'll be joined by Rabbi Leila Gal Berner, who's going to be doing also some work on Teshuvah using a text from the Tanakh. Number two is that if you would like to hear Reb Zalman, Olav Shalom, chanting the chant that Reb Daniel started out with, Lecha Amar Libi. I just put it in the chat, and it's a video, and I believe it's about a minute and a half into that video where Reb Zalman offers it himself. And last but not least, thank you all for your holy presence this evening. Old friends, new friends, continuing friends, beloved friends. I'm looking at my Florida friends. And there are two kinds of people in the world. There are Moshniks and not yet Moshniks. And so we look forward to welcoming you back into this holy Zoomagog. We are, to the best of my knowledge, the only exclusively online community. And we have co-created something very, very deep, very intimate, very joyous, very contemplative, that we'd like to welcome you to at another time. Dibarti, Reb Daniel, want to take us out with one of Chana's melodies?
Yeah. One thing is that Devora was asking in the chat, where do you get the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur book? They're all in the Aleph catalog, which is on the Aleph Canada website. So alephcanada.ca, and then find your way to the catalog and you'll see all the things that are there. Some of them, there's a small charge for, some of them are free. Okay. I keep the one I'm trying to remember, I'm having trouble remembering. No, Hannah, that's not the one I'm thinking of. I'm getting prompted. It's the one that's right before Zalman's Niggin, in the middle of the psalm. Unfortunately, I don't have a siddur right in my hand. If you can indulge me for just a minute, I know another one, but
What psalm is it? I can pick it up.
well, I got it. It's Psalm 27.
All righty.
I can find it. I'll have it in a minute. I'm going the old fashioned way. Okay?
Kavelia.
No, that's at the end.
Oh, okay.
That's what I did the first day I was singing it.
Psalm 27. And
Shema Adonai. Hear, God, my voice when I call, and be gracious to me. Shema Adonai. Koli ekra. Shema Adonai. Koli ekra. V'chaneini, v'aneini, v'chaneini, v'aneini. Shema Adonai, Koli ekra. Shema Adonai, Koli ekra. V'chaneini, v'aneini, v'chaneini, v'aneini. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Reb Daniel. Laila Tov, everyone. Vochem l'shalom, seitchem l'shalom. Laila Tov. This is the time for returning to the one from where we've come from. Who am I? Where am I? Go ahead, Mira. Where am I? When will I be the one who I was meant to be? Who am I? Where am I? When will I be the one who I was meant to be? Good night, everyone.